Good afternoon. The hearing of the Senate Foreign Relations, Africa, and Global Health Policy Subcommittee will come to order. Welcome to our witness. Thank you all for joining us today. There is a consensus emerging. First, that for decades the United States has been disregarding acute national security challenges and critical opportunities in Africa. And second, that for the safety and prosperity of Americans, we can no longer afford to do so. I believe that consensus is both correct and long overdue. The emphasis and attention that President Trump has already given to Africa is a demonstration of that consensus. Those challenges and opportunities are vast. They include threats posed by China, Russia, and Iran, as well as an array of regional crises. There are also wide-ranging options for cooperation on everything from critical minerals to technology and even space development. I intend for this subcommittee to serve as a primary forum for shaping and articulating the policies of the United States towards Africa on these issues and beyond. The Constitution envisions foreign policy as a tug-of-war between Congress and the executive. I have no doubt that over the coming months and years, there will be many instances in which members of this committee have vigorous and robust debates with administration officials testifying before us. Such debates are a necessary part of formulating policy. However, I also have every expectation that there will be significant areas of bipartisan convergence and agreement. Many of the challenges we face are so fundamental and have been neglected for so long that what needs to be done is relatively clear. We have an enormous amount of work to do. These hearings will allow for the formulation of U.S. policies and will more fundamentally demonstrate that the United States has a policy towards Africa. Today's hearing is on China's malign influence in Africa. China represents the most significant long-term strategic threat to the United States. I believe that fundamentally, China is a global threat that must be confronted globally, region by region. Among those regions, pressingly, is Africa. China is exercising its military, economic, and political power and advancing its authoritarian agenda, all while undermining the sovereignty of African nations and the strategic interest of the United States. Politically and diplomatically, China is leveraging its growing influence to marginalize U.S. allies, most notably Taiwan. The Chinese Communist Party is pouring billions into its Belt and Road Initiative, trapping African countries in unsustainable debt and using these arrangements to block American interests. The primary reason why China is investing so heavily in Africa is critical minerals. China already dominates critical mineral global supply chains, and China is aggressively locking up control over these resources across Africa. That leaves the United States vulnerable to being cut off. Xi Jinping talks about, quote, world socialism, and declares that, quote, realizing communism has been the party's supreme ideal and ultimate objective. The CCP is building a military capable of global power projection and creating regional economic blocs that exclude the United States because they intend to project power globally at the expense of core American national security interests. Countering Chinese malign influence in Africa requires us to reshape the paradigm of U.S.-Africa policy. For decades, U.S.-Africa policy has been synonymous with aid and development. Today, we are changing that paradigm. Today and into the future, U.S.-Africa policy will revolve around investment-led commercial diplomacy. To counter China, we need to partner with our allies and friends in Africa to promote, expand, and grow trade and investment relationships. To be an alternative to China, We have to create real alternatives to China. This is what we will discuss today. I want to thank Ambassador Fitrell for joining us today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony and insights into this critical issue. And I now recognize Ranking Member Booker for his opening remarks.
I want to thank the chairman for calling really an urgent hearing. I want to thank our witness. I think we're going to have a really good conversation. I want to thank you also for your flexibility. I know we bounced around with the time. It just means a lot. As you know, we're pulled in a million different directions, and your courtesy there is extraordinary. This is an issue, as we talked a moment ago privately, that is of great importance to me, and where there has been, in my years on the Foreign Relations Committee, extraordinary bipartisan connectivity. We know that while we cannot disregard the malign activities of China, Russia, and other foreign actors across the continent, we cannot only look at Africa through the lens of the great power competition. It's important that we as America affirm our larger values, because if we ignore Africa's connection to our future, to America's future security, to America's future prosperity on its own merits, then we do so at our own peril. The continent of Africa is an indispensable set of opportunities and interconnections that are vital. And one great example of that is that Africa has this extraordinary future ahead of us. As a growing population of youth, and by 2050, 1 in 4 people on the planet Earth will be from Africa, and because of the youth bulge there, 1 in every 3 working age human beings on the planet Earth by 2050 will be from Africa. I have found great partnership over the years with Secretary Rubio when he was a senator. He has been someone who has understood the urgencies of the continent, especially through the context of that great power struggle. He looked and has said many times that people are the continent's most important advantage. And the U.S. policy towards Africa, according to our now Secretary of State, is to double down on our investments in our partnerships with African people. Not only will this approach directly benefit the United States, but it will undercut the PRC's influence by ensuring that the United States is the trusted partner of choice. You see, our values are our advantage. I've talked to so many African leaders, as I know my more eminent colleague Chris Coons has, and many of them tell us they don't want to deal with China. They prefer us, but China is showing up in places we are not, making connections and partnerships that we are not. If we are going to compete there, let's compete with our American values. They will win every single time. So, Ambassador, I share your interests in expanding trade with Africa countries and increasing U.S. commercial investments and connections between America and African businesses. When I go to Africa, I meet with Americans doing business there all of the time, and it's extraordinary. The upside, it is an emerging market that's going to, again, with that population growth, be vital for American-made products, American technology, American innovation. This is a place where America should be leaning in to thrive. However, we need a coherent strategy in order to take advantage of this extraordinary opportunities. And I'm concerned that the many Trump executive orders on tariffs and subsequent reversals suggest that no strategy really exists. And more importantly, the idea that the United States should not focus on commercial deal-making while ignoring stabilization issues, humanitarian need issues, and increasing good governance is really short-sighted and undermines the potential upside for Americans and American businesses. Right now, China has eclipsed Russia as the largest weapons exporter to sub-Saharan Africa. Chinese drones, armed vehicles, firearms have flooded conflict zones from Sudan to West Africa and the Sahel. China's largest weapons producer, Norinco, has established regional offices in Nigeria, South Africa, Angola, and Senegal. China's security ties to Africa transcend more than just weaponry, as direct training and tactical information sharing increases. African governments, particularly those dealing with the threat of violent extremism, say they want to deepen their security and information sharing apparatus with the United States. So what is our strategy here? Commercial diplomacy is vital, but alone it will not get us to where we need to be. Further, should the rumors about potential dismantling of U.S. commands like AFRICOM occur, this will directly undermine our interests and cede further space to China in Africa. So to say that I'm concerned about the Trump administration's policies to date is a vast understatement. My private conversations, again, with our Secretary of State make me understand that he knows the importance and urgency of the work that I am discussing. But since January, the Trump administration has undercut our partnerships across the continent and ceded ground to China at every turn. From cutting off life-saving humanitarian aid programs without warning to canceling global health programs that prevent the spread of infectious diseases. From terminating programs that feed the hungry and prevent conflict to canceling programs that lift people up out of poverty and keep children in school and prevent the recruitment into extremist groups, all things that inure to the benefit of our business interests as well as the moral values that guide our country. And despite claiming to want to increase economic opportunities, the administration has terminated the bipartisan programs that build democratic reliance and a healthy workforce, foster good governments, and level the playing field for American businesses trying to find new local partners and access new markets. One way to ensure deeper ties with African communities was through the President's Advisory Council on the African Diaspora Engagement. I see my nods from my colleague here that we know that that actual work, that affirming good faith ties for business, it has so assisted the United States in identifying public and private sector exchanges and investments across Africa. It deepens our dialogue, our connection, and our shared values. But here are some examples of bipartisan programs that have either been terminated or paused. PEPFAR, HIV prevention programs that would help eliminate HIV and AIDS as a public health threat by 2030 if continued, while China Aid takes over early childhood development and global health programs that the United States used to fund. They're filling our void. The MCC compacts that build critical infrastructure in Africa and partner countries. This is an extraordinary bipartisan work that we've done. The chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee was one of its big champions. Now, unfortunately, China expands its Belt and Road Initiative with surveillance wired buildings and infrastructure, debt level leveraged aid and values that are antithetical to a real democratic partnership. Democracy and good governance programs are vital. While China increases CCP trainings and engagement with Africa policymakers, we are seeing democratic slippage, which ultimately threatens our way of life as well as our ability to establish a world-based rules order. People-to-people educational and cultural exchanges, such as the Young African Leadership Initiative. This we know, how many African leaders we meet when we're abroad that say, I was educated in the United States, and the value of that alone in advantaging the United States. But unfortunately now we see China increasing their educational, commercial, and diplomatic exchange programs. Life-saving humanitarian aid programs like in Sudan that I witnessed with my own eyes, where a child is dying every 2 hours due to malnutrition. We are stepping out, China is stepping in to increase its humanitarian response. The United States right now is taking a sledgehammer not only to these vital programs that have been supported in a bipartisan way that have unified our Foreign Relations Committee, it is also taking a sledgehammer to U.S. credibility. This is something that is vital. In business, reputation is everything. The Trump administration has dealt a double blow now, ceding moral ground and losing strategic influence on top of undermining America's values and how they are embraced by by African nations. We've created a vacuum that our competitors are showing they're willing to fill. In fact, they're racing to fill it. Not just China, but Russia, Iran, and others are stepping up on their Africa engagement and investments. These regimes do not bring hope. They bring surveillance, coercion, instability, and greater threats to the United States' security, safety, and prosperity. The United States strategy across Africa has never been perfect. We can do better. We can do better than we did in the past, better than what Trump is doing now, better than what previous administrations have done. Certainly, though, with China and their plans and their investments, we need to step up. I look forward to hearing from your testimony today, and again, I'm grateful that we're holding this hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Booker. Ambassador Fitrell, you're now recognized for your opening statement.
All right, thank you, Chairman Cruz and Ranking Member Booker, and thank you, Senator Coons, for being here. And thank you for your interest in this subject. This is something I've dedicated most of the 30 years of my career to, and I find it incredibly fulfilling and a positive task. For all the challenges we have in Africa, these are absolutely exciting times. And I think the strategy we're going to put forward to that is going to be extremely helpful in advancing American interests and priorities while countering China's interests. As the Senior Bureau Official for Africa, I'm honored to discuss our strategic priorities and the measures we're taking to ensure that our engagement furthers the Trump administration's goal of making America safer, stronger, and more prosperous. Africa's growing economies and population provide extraordinary opportunities for Americans and U.S. businesses. I think Senator Booker expressed most of those statistics pretty accurately, so I'll skip those. But new sectors are also gaining ground. The region's digital economy, valued at $180 billion in 2024, has quadrupled in the last 10 years. These are opportunities. And in the face of these opportunities, the U.S. share of exports to sub-Saharan Africa has been in decline for decades. In 2000, the U.S. was the second largest exporter to sub-Saharan Africa, but Beijing's government-backed strategies to capture African market share have led China to export $137 billion just in the last year, more than 7 times what the United States has exported. This underscores a fundamental point. The opportunity in sub-Saharan Africa is not theoretical. It's already being seized by our adversaries. For too long, the United States has prioritized development assistance over commercial engagement. And this has already begun to change under the Trump administration. We're now focusing on investment-led growth, which is more sustainable. Trade over aid is now truly America's policy for Africa. And we will prioritize engaging the African continent more strategically as peers and as partners. And the approach could not have come soon enough. Greater U.S. economic engagement is urgently needed to bolster African efforts to counter China's growing influence. China has long recognized the important role of Africa, and sub-Saharan Africa's resources are part of Beijing's global hegemony ambitions. China's strategy for economic dominance relies on a centralized, state-directed, and nationally resourced approach to dominating global markets and strategic supply chains, limiting foreign competitors, and making other economies dependent on China. This is harmful to both American and African interests. China exploits Africa's natural resources in its play for dominance and control over global critical mineral supply chains. This is a clear example of the economic, political, and national security threats that China's influence in Africa poses. As Secretary Rubio stated during his confirmation hearing, it is in the interest of global peace and stability that we speak with China, but we cannot allow Beijing to continue to flout the rules, undermine us economically, or allow it to damage or weaken our alliances and our presence in the world. It is imperative for the United States and Africa to be free of Beijing's corrupt monopoly, especially in these supply chains we rely on for defense and innovation. African markets need to diversify, empowering the continent as it progresses and grows. So as I said, we're fundamentally shifting our approach to Africa to a strategy that prioritizes robust commercial engagement, recognizing African nations as equal partners in trade and investment. By focusing on private sector-led growth and empowering American companies to compete more effectively, the administration is responding to these long-standing gaps. We have 6 targeted actions designed to reposition the United States. These include making commercial diplomacy a core priority across our U.S. embassies, promoting private sector-identified market reforms with African governments, implementing high-quality infrastructure projects, including commercial diplomacy missions with private sector representatives, connecting export-ready U.S. companies with African opportunities, and reforming our own U.S. trade and financing tools to better compete with China's swift and risk-tolerance financial model. Together, these efforts reflect an action-oriented vision to increase U.S. exports and joint ventures with African partners. The strategy's success relies on U.S. companies expanding into new markets and African partners creating enabling environments. This approach offers a clear alternative to China's model by favoring long-term quality, local capacity building, and mutual respect. The stakes are high, but we are steadfast in our commitment to champion transparency, openness, and fair competition. So again, thank you very much for your interest in this subject. I'd also like to, before I stop, to just simply say that as a former Hill staffer myself, I'd like to thank all of your staffers. I know how hard they work and how well they represent you and your constituents, especially over in the African continent. Thank you.
Well, that's some damn fine kissing up to the staff. And given that mine provided Diet Dr. Pepper to me, I echo that sentiment for keeping me well caffeinated. As I discussed in my opening statement, the Chinese have exploited local political, economic, and sometimes even cultural conditions to undermine American national security interests. Sometimes they do it by securing bilateral and multilateral agreements that block American goals. Other times they do it by creating instability. But they are actively doing it, and I want to hear from you how they do it. Could you walk us through, region by region, how China is exploiting these conditions to undermine U.S. interests?
You bet, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the opportunity to just jump right into that. As we run around the continent, most of the playbook that China uses occurs everywhere around the continent. But there are some regional trends. So as I roll around, everything is true everywhere in Africa, but there are some focuses that change a little bit. If I were to start in Central and Southern Africa, of course, it most heavily relies on the mineral space and the extractive space. These are the minerals that they've gone into fast and hard. And part of it, part of the playbook that I think you're asking for was first just being there first and having an incredibly high risk tolerance. And by being able to go in without having to worry about meeting the needs of their shareholders or their board of directors, and being able to focus on just capturing that market without worrying about turning a profit right away, that allowed them to keep and maintain the entire supply chain. Of course, we try and open a minerals processing plant in the U.S. There's a lot of permitting and issues in that. Same with Europe. But in China, where they don't care, they were able to toss that up right off the bat. And then once they had a sort of a dominant position there, they were able to use that to continue to maintain. One of the things we've seen recently is the global need for lithium is almost infinite, and vastly 30, 40 times more than we currently have. So there's a lot of interest in engaging in new lithium operations. So as Western companies were looking to both look at mining, at processing, and at the whole supply chain, China immediately dumped a lot of lithium on the market, crashing the price. And of course, what you see there then is as these Western companies were going to solicit financing and talking to banks and doing that kind of work, with the crashing lithium price, suddenly the projects were no longer viable. And that kind of manipulation is a big part of the threat that they have against the United States. When we look in East Africa, we see a lot in the regards of infrastructure kinds of investment, the traditional roads, rail, bridges, that kind of thing, hydroelectric facilities. But let's not forget digital infrastructure. Being in first in that matters as well. A lot of these can be found as just debt vehicles. I've on multiple occasions dealt with governments that have asked my help in finding investors to privatize some of their, because they can't maintain the debt. But then they find that the market value of this item is double or is half what they still owe on the facility. So they're just trapped into that forever. That's hugely problematic. And in the digital side, of course, if you want to be part of the modern economy, you're going to need to have trusted, safe networks. And so basically every country on the African continent has come to me to ask help in encouraging the big tech companies, Oracle, Microsoft, Google, et cetera, to come to their country. But they won't come if they can't trust the networks that are there. And so many of the countries are faced with the issue of, if we want to have a modern digital economy, if we know where we need to be in the future, we actually need to rip out those systems and replace them, because we simply can't operate in isolation with substandard technology in which all of our data is now subject to Chinese manipulation. And that's been hugely problematic across the continent. In West Africa, it's often kind of a mix of the two. But one thing I would add to that that's not frequently mentioned is, in addition to this insatiable desire for minerals, it's all sorts of extractives, including timber, the deforestation, but especially fishing. When you look at the fishing grounds especially of Western Africa, but really of all coastal Africa, that is the protein for the people. But when you see these Chinese trawlers coming in and utterly destroying the fishing grounds, and you can see them on over-the-shelf, unclassified satellite imagery, trawling back and forth, then suddenly doing a beeline 60 miles offshore, meet a buy boat, offload all the fish, come back to port and say, oh, we didn't catch anything again today. And they don't catch anything any day, at least according to their official records. And meanwhile, the amount of food available for the Africans is much more expensive, in much less supply, and this is a direct and tremendous threat. And forgive me for going on a little bit more on that subject, but it's not one that normally gets mentioned, but it is indicative of the business model that the Chinese entertain on the continent.
Now, of all those threats you described, what keeps you up at night? What worries you the most?
I ain't gonna lie, I'm actually really excited to work in Africa, and there are a lot of really positive stories. So actually, I sleep pretty well in that regard. I'm all in on Africa's future because I really believe in the place. A lot of people talk about how, in 2040 it's going to be this much, but the fact is, Africa is hugely important right now, and I'm excited by that. But you asked the question, so let me go ahead and address that. Part of it is the kind of irreparable damage that a lot of these operations can have. I'd say probably the number one example was just recently when a Chinese tailings dam collapsed and they dumped something like 40 million gallons of sulfuric acid into the Kafue River, just potentially destroying the livelihoods of 6 million people. That was just the one example, but that kind of shoddy behavior and completely ignoring the rules-based order in which they ostensibly live, that kind of thing becoming systemic, yeah, that would be what keeps me up.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Just for knowing that our colleagues, you and I are going to be here for the duration, are being pulled in a lot of different directions, I just want to defer to my friend who I have learned so much for, more than I have learned in any of my classes at Stanford. You should work at the Hoover Institution, my friend.
I appreciate your suggestion I should work at the Hoover Institution. And
I'm not trying to get you out of the Senate.
Senator Cruz is eager to second that motion.
I will say this, that Senator Booker, I think, has upstaged the ambassador on ass kissery. And it's a damn fine demonstration.
Thank you for a deference to my diplomatic skills. I really appreciate that. You should teach a class there, not leave the Senate, of course, my esteemed colleague.
Thank you, Senator. I may wait for your questions nonetheless, and I'll take the opportunity to ask a couple of questions at the outset, if I might. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. 14 years ago, when I chaired this subcommittee with Johnny Isakson, we held an identical hearing. It was on the same subject. We issued a report afterwards. I could not agree with you more that Africa is the continent of the 21st century. When we held that hearing 14 years ago, 7 out of 10 of the fastest growing economies on Earth were in Africa. And we said many of the same things. The framing is not that different. Critical minerals, enormous human resources, huge untapped potential, deep ties to Africa through the diaspora, and leader after leader, country after country that would rather have more U.S. engagement, U.S. investment, U.S. partnership than China. Despite what Senator Isakson and I and a number of others were able to do legislatively 10, 12, 14 years ago, China has exploded. If we had a chart behind me of China-Africa trade and U.S.-Africa trade, the lines have crossed and accelerated. As you pointed out in your testimony, China has found Africa and is all over the place. First, I think our embassy footprints across the continent are critical. Senator Durbin and I worked during the Obama administration to force the Department of Commerce to make sure foreign commercial service officers were deployed throughout the continent, not withdrawn, because market opportunities require foreign commercial service presence. I ratify your view that we need to strengthen private sector partnerships and public-private partnerships in our work with Africa. Can I ask you first, what are the plans of the State Department in terms of retaining or expanding our current embassy and consular footprint in order to help American businesses in healthcare and technology and farming and infrastructure have a stronger footprint across the continent?
Thank you, Senator. You actually raise a number of the issues that we discuss every day. Mm-hmm. And by the way, I would suggest that I wish 14 years ago we'd gotten very serious and made some of these changes then, because I think it would have been helpful, especially regarding the work that we actually need to do here in the United States regarding the actual processing of minerals so that we can be part of the overall supply chain. But as to your question, First, we have a pretty wide spread of embassies. Honestly, I believe...
I've got about 2.5 minutes, so
let me get faster.
To say we're shutting down 10, we're not shutting down 10, we're retaining a strong...
Not only do I not know of shutting anything down, I don't even know of any conversations about that.
Good.
And I know there were some documents floating around, but those were not real. And there aren't even any conversations on
my enthusiasm for a strong presence across the continent. Yeah. One of the things we did work hard on over many years was taking a small, underfunded, under-resourced entity called OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and turn it into the Development Finance Corporation. Senator Corker, then chair of Foreign Relations, and I co-authored the BUILD Act that created it. And I meet later today with President Trump's nominee, who I hope to support and work with. The DFC has critical potential to provide competitive financing. China's debt trap financing, which is often opaque, often accelerates corruption, typically does not serve the interests of the people or even the nations of Africa, has to have a side-by-side challenge from the U.S. and its partners. Yep. I've recently talked with leaders of the development finance institutions, of Japan, South Korea, Australia, Norway, the UK. They are eager to partner with the DFC, but it still lacks a few key legal fixes, equity investment in particular. The DFC played a key role in the last administration in the Lobito Corridor project that connects the Angolan Atlantic coast all the way in to the eastern DRC and potentially all the way into Rwanda. What's your sense of the importance of sustaining the Lobito Corridor project? Because I understand it enjoys sustained support.
Yep.
And when I was last briefed on it, a key piece of it was the seemingly irrelevant humanitarian mission of demining. Angola has millions of unexploded mines, and it has prevented a lot of economic growth and opportunity. The Angolan government came forward when I last was there with, I think, a $60 million commitment of their own money to partner with us in demining. But I've lost the thread as all these different projects and contracts have been canceled. Does the administration support continuing with the Lobito Corridor infrastructure project and giving these countries of that region, Zaire, Democratic Republic of the Congo, Zambia, Rwanda, and Angola, access to our markets, not just Chinese markets? And are you continuing the demining partnership with Angola?
Lobito is a tremendous success. We absolutely love it, and we're absolutely committed to its future. Indeed, I want to copy the model and do that elsewhere because it's been so successful, and especially thanks to DFC and their immediate action in there as the catalyst, which then allowed to bring in blended finance to make the project work. I worked on demining in Angola several years ago. I'm afraid I don't have the up-to-date information. I wasn't expecting that one, but I will find out if those programs continue. I know we have been supporting them, but I will find an answer to that and get that back to you, sir.
I'd welcome that. Let me reference 3 other things briefly, and then I'll recede and perhaps stay for another round, if I might. I've been working hard with other senators on things that try and address current issues. Senator Ricketts and I recently went to the Philippines to look at the status of the Luzon Corridor, also a DFC-led project. Countering Chinese efforts to secure naval bases or military bases around the world, I think, is a key part of our competition with China. Their first overseas naval base is in Djibouti. Their first overseas major military base, arguably, is in Djibouti. There have been repeated reports they are attempting to secure a base in Gabon. And Senator Ricketts and I have introduced the Counter Act, which is to require a strategy specifically focusing on sustaining broad-spectrum positive relationships with countries where we are at risk of having them agree to host a Chinese military facility. Do you think that's necessary? Do you think it's wise? What's your understanding of the current status of this issue?
I think it's absolutely necessary to compete against that notion. We want to have deep, complex, and positive relationships with all countries in Africa. But in particular, we make it clear to those countries that might be flirting with that kind of a relationship with China that they would be jeopardizing the ability to have that kind of relationship with us.
Last thing I'll reference is Senator Young and I have the Finding Ore Act, which is, as you probably well know, recognizes the reality that although there are abundant critical minerals across the continent, most of them are not adequately characterized. And so the unique American resource of the U.S. Geological Survey under this bill, if it became law, would be offered to countries as long as U.S. or U.S. partner companies got the right of first refusal. It would be a wise way to use an existing U.S. capability and resource to help countries around the world. Earlier today, a bipartisan group of senators met with the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians have recently inked a critical minerals deal with the Trump administration. But most of the maps of where their minerals are date back to the Soviet era. We have the capacity to help characterize where they are and to make sure that our companies and our partner and allied countries benefit as a result. Do you think that's a worthwhile effort?
Thank you very much for stressing it. Absolutely right. The appetite amongst professionals to engage with the U.S. Geological Survey is near infinite. They are the best respected entity of its type in the world. And their work across the African continent is well respected, and I get regular requests for engagement with them. I would look favorably and with great expectation to have greater attention from the U.S. Geological Survey on the African continent.
I'd love to work with you on that and on both of these pieces of legislation, and I apologize because I have overstayed my welcome quite a bit. I have a few more questions if and when we have a second round. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Coons, and I'm going to ask my staff to follow up with yours to take a look at that bill you referenced, because that sounds like a very interesting policy idea. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I just want to go back to the libido corridor, if we can, because I agree with what you're saying, but my concerns are about this all-in policy on the libido corridor, the enthusiasm, but we have seen right now $550 million in DFC funds that haven't been distributed yet, and that's concerning to me, understanding sort of the urgencies and how a little bit of U.S. investment goes a long way and would seem to reflect that belief that you are saying that we agree with, which is this all-in attitude. Again, the alternative will be China stepping in, will be China stepping up. And so I don't know why the U.S. Geological Survey in Angola on critical minerals was stopped as well, and I'm hoping you can shed some light on that.
Thank you. That gives me a chance to continue on. First, I understand the engagement of the U.S. Geological Survey is just simply a question of funding. And of course, they don't work for me, so I can't arrange that, but I certainly strongly advocate their continued participation. Regarding Lobito and the potential on that, of course, DFC was the tremendous catalyst. As it happens, I'm going to be in Luanda in about 2 weeks because the Corporate Council on Africa is doing their U.S.-Africa Business Summit there, where I will be engaging with the President and the Foreign Minister, and especially their Minister of Mines, to discuss a number of these issues. In fact, the whole point of my going is a commercial advocacy trip, and there's a number of U.S. companies who have ongoing issues. The fact is, throughout the African continent, trade can be complicated, it can be difficult. It's not an easy business environment. If it was, anybody could do it. And so it requires a lot of advocacy, and that's what we're committed to doing. So in regard to getting the proper disbursements, not just for Lobito, but also for solar power and other forms of transportation that are existing, that are projects in Angola right now, we're going to engage on those. And that's particularly why I will be there.
Thank you very much. It's really critical that we continue those linkages, and I know your expertise and the sort of esteem with which you're held, for you to be making the call for that disbursement, I think it would be really helpful. I know something dear to my colleagues is AGOA, and I just think that the renewal of AGOA is vital. Would you agree?
Thank you. I actually spent a good bit of time today discussing that. I was hoping to get an administration position on AGOA to bring to this hearing. There are still some discussions going on, but there's no question that the last 25 years we have seen some spectacular successes, but also some spectacular needs for reform. So we hope to have an administration position on AGOA for you. I'm hoping within hours, possibly within days. But so I can't answer that right this second.
But another reflection of who you are and your I think, frankly, very informed opinion is the fact that you went and talked to the administration, pushing to get us, knowing this would be discussed. That encourages me. Are you thinking a little bit, I'm sure you are, thinking more nuanced about how AGOA could be a really great piece, like linking AGOA with building out the Libido corridor? Those could be related as a means to benefit the African communities that are really along the corridor and increasing opportunities for U.S. businesses. Is this like another possible way that we can increase that momentum within the corridor and provide alternatives to the Chinese investment model?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. I tend to use every tool that we have available to us, but that is certainly one of them. I think one thing has become clear that when we established AGOA 25 years ago, the world was a very different place. When I was talking about how excited I am about the opportunities in Africa right now, they're different than they were 25 years ago. And thus, for me, the need to have a real conversation about what a modern AGOA should look like is important. And it should be linked to the types of things that facilitate projects like Libido and other truly open society types of investment. And so that's something that we're absolutely committed to doing.
Great, and I really feel bad for a lot of the young people that have packed this hearing room, have no idea all the letters that we're throwing out there, but so maybe you can help with MCC and explaining it, but telling me, is this something else? Because it's one of the best tools we have in competing. I'm very concerned about the modest funds that we invest. We know they have an outsized return, and they've always seemed to garner bipartisan support. But the MCC, its impact that I've witnessed myself in some of my visits, we know last year Congress on a bipartisan basis expanded the number of countries MCC could work in because we understood of its vital. Rish, who I want to quote, has said very strongly we want to work with you, speaking to Secretary Rubio, to ensure that we have the tools to counter Chinese influence through the Development Finance Corporation and the MCC. But again, I just see MCC being targeted by Doge and others, which really undermines what we're doing. There's at least 7 MCC compacts with African countries that are currently paused. While paused, the U.S. and our African government partners are incurring costs because of project delays, which is extraordinary. Time is money. These compacts include road improvements, agriculture improvements, energy security, all that makes for a better platform for investment, for expanded economic opportunity for our African partners and for the United States. If the U.S. pulls out of these MCC compacts, how can African governments and businesses feel secure to enter into commercial diplomacy deals with the United States when the government doesn't follow through on its own commitments? When Congress, who's allocated money in a bipartisan way, has that money impounded by the administration, it seems not only to undermine what I would think is important rules of law of this government, but it burns through a lot of trust, increasing project costs, not making any kind of rational business sense whatsoever.
Okay, thank you. I do stick my nose in where it doesn't belong on many an occasion and across the investment and economic tools that the U.S. government has. I don't have oversight on the MCC, but I can say that internally we've had discussions during this review of all assistance programming and have advocated for the types of programs, like you said, where we need to continue the funding just so that the project wasn't at any natural stopping point. We've been quite successful on that so far, but the overall responsibility for the future of the MCC is not something that's in my purview. I would tell you if I knew. I just don't know where that's going. But I can tell you that I visited an MCC project in Abidjan about 2 weeks ago when I was there for the Africa CEO Forum, and it is a dramatic sort of investment, a dramatic symbol of America there. And it is one of the first things that the Ivoirian government mentioned to me upon my arrival and upon my meetings with them. And I can tell you that the interest of the host governments has been dramatic in this regard. I have actually several pending calls that I have to make after I leave here to talk to countries about their potential future of the MCC. I've explained to them that I'm not actually the guy who is responsible for that, but I'm still interested in our relationships with those countries, and that's why I'll be making those calls. But for that regard, I'm waiting for those who are at MCC and the end of that assistance review.
Thank you.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your service and for your testimony here today. And I want to thank the Chairman and Ranking Member for holding this hearing on this topic. So I was listening to your testimony, and I think you made a number of important observations, and I'm not sure the plan of action that you laid out, the 6 points, addresses the problem completely. You pointed out in your testimony that China can act swiftly and they're risk tolerant. You also pointed out rightly that they don't have to worry about meeting their stockholders' requirements, right? I mean, these are fundamental differences between the way China approaches Africa and the United States does, right? And so it seems to me if we're going to be able to compete, we have to use these tools. Senator Coons was very involved in the DFC effort. Senator Booker just raised concerns that I share about the plans, as I understand it, to get rid of the MCC. But I guess the point is you can't beat the China offer, which often comes in as a debt trap, but it comes in appearing to be less costly without something better, right? I mean, you can't beat nothing. You can't beat something with nothing. And that is why these tools are so important. So maybe you could lay out a little bit exactly in your 6 points how you envision beefing up those tools. And I do want to close by saying this is not an either-or proposition in my view, like the development assistance. My view, and I echo Senator Booker's concerns expressed, you know, we can pursue active private commercial engagements, which we should, and frankly, every administration, Republican or Democrat, for the last 15 years have said that that's their goal, and to do it on an equal basis. But you don't have to cut, you know, humanitarian assistance to Sudan in order to, at the same time, pursue commercial interests. And I think that that's been devastating, frankly, to our own interests, as well as the interests of people in Africa. But maybe you could just take up this issue about how we can deal with a competitor that doesn't have to demonstrate an immediate return to their shareholders, because that's the fundamental question here. You talk about getting more, you know, commercial attachés and others, and I'm all for that. But at the end of the day, an American company is not going to go in there unless they think they're going to be able to deliver for their shareholders, and it's hard to see how they can without some support with using these other tools. So could you elaborate on that?
Thank you very much, Senator. Probably in reverse order. You mentioned Sudan last, and we spend an extraordinary amount of time trying to resolve the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. I spent a good bit of time on that yesterday. We're looking to have a fairly high-level meeting on that in the coming weeks. We have not stopped doing those things because we're making commercial diplomacy a priority. And at the risk of sounding like a one-note orchestra, the reason why we've been making such a big deal about the commercial diplomacy is because that's the thing we're doing that's dramatically different from before. That's the thing that's being promoted and advanced in our strategy that is different, and that's why we're doing that. Of the two, it's probably 2 items of the 6 directly address your question. The one is about the reform of our tools. I'm a huge fan of DSC, and I'm thrilled that the nominee is here in the building and hope will be confirmed fairly soon. But even DFC understands that the way it was built, the way it was designed, and the way it needs to go forward may be different. Being faster, more nimble, instead of just being the only investor, about being the leader of a blended finance. These types of reforms will make it a better entity, but it's an entity on which, frankly, our entire strategy relies. We need that kind of finance, that kind of aggression, and that kind of optimism. Some of it is also, if you look at the Exim Bank, I believe they have a 2% failure cap, and they don't reach it. I think they're at about 1.2%. Personally, I would like to double that cap to 4 and ensure that they reach it. I want them being aggressive. I want them, frankly, having some loans that don't work. It's not just a matter of the number of successful projects that you have, because if that's all you're focused on, then you're behaving just like a normal bank. And we have plenty of normal banks. We need these investment arms to do the things, to lead, so that the private sector can then engage afterwards, to attract. And that's where we see that kind of.
You know, you're preaching to the choir on the Exim Bank issue and some of these other issues. I will just say in closing, since you elaborated on Sudan, you know, as I said, we can pursue commercial engagement and humanitarian assistance. I think you're aware of the fact that the dramatic cuts to AID did result in people dying in Sudan unnecessarily when food couldn't get to them. I would also just point out with respect to you mentioned your efforts with respect to the UAE and the conflict there. The UAE, as you well know, is continuing to support the RSF, Rapid Support Forces, militarily, unless you have an update on that suggests otherwise. And yet, during President Trump's recent trip to the UAE, it's my understanding he never even raised that issue. Is that your understanding?
Thank you for that. I would suggest we have support from the highest levels to engage all of the interested parties in that region with finding a way to move off of entrenched positions towards a productive way forward. Okay. It is the worst humanitarian situation in the world. I would suggest, however, that those feeding programs, I've spent a lot of round the clock, all night long kinds of issues going through thousands of line items of support issues, that we have maintained those programs. And I would say that people are surviving in Sudan because of the support that the United States has provided there.
I'd be happy, I don't want to prolong this, but I'd be happy to send you all the articles about the costs as a result of the withdrawal of U.S. assistance to Sudan at some point. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ambassador, I want to get back to the topic of critical minerals. In your opening statement, you described the really dominant position China has with critical minerals in Africa. And unfortunately, America lost significant ground in the Biden administration. And you focused on the supply chain, and President Biden canceled mineral leases for the Twin Metals mine in Minnesota. And the administration also deliberately rejected Alaska's Ambler Road project. And blocking domestic critical minerals mining only reinforces our overseas critical mineral supply chain reliance, and that's a market, unfortunately, that China dominates. Less than 1% of the global rare earth element refining capacity exists in the United States. Most U.S. mined or collected rare earth element material is sent to China for separation and processing. Trump's executive order calling for, quote, immediate measures to increase American mineral production has put us back on the right course. We need your leadership to marshal resources to cultivate partnerships in the critical mineral sector in Africa. And for the United States to be an alternative to China in Africa, we need to create real alternatives in Africa. We need to translate the talk and policy into tangible action and impact. Could you please describe the efforts underway within the department to work with our international partners across Africa and U.S. companies to build a more resilient, transparent, and diversified supply chain of critical minerals from Africa to the United States?
Thank you very much for raising that. I spend more time working with the American private sector than I do with government officials because they're the ones who are going to be key to solving this issue. It would be easy and cheap and ultimately disastrous to continue to rely on China for these sorts of things. We do have to have our own domestic capacity. I'm not the one who does domestic work, but there are people across this government that do, and we engage on a regular basis. When it comes to making sure our allies and partners are involved as well, I spent a good bit of time this morning with the European Union's Peace and Security Committee because they're concerned about these issues as well, and they also have a challenge that they need to invest in minerals processing and usage. Quite simply, it's my job to get the throughput for that processing. As we have operations in Houston for developing critical minerals processing, we have new operations also coming up the Mississippi Valley, particularly in Arkansas, I believe. It's my job to get the throughput for that, and that's where I'm engaging with the mining companies and with the transportation companies and the power companies to make sure that that's doable.
China has also been leveraging its power to advance its diplomatic goals and undermine American diplomacy. And it uses its relationship to undermine, in particular, the diplomatic status of Taiwan. In April, Somalia banned Taiwanese passport holders from entering the country in response to deepening ties between Somaliland and Taiwan. This action by Somalia prevented Taiwan's foreign minister from undertaking a planned visit to Somaliland. As if the Chinese Communist Party's political interference wasn't enough, there are reports that the support China provides to the Somali government makes its way to anti-Somaliland groups opposing Somaliland. Let me be clear. China is leveraging Somalia against the pro-U.S., pro-Israel, pro-West Somaliland because of Somaliland's relationship with Taiwan. How should the United States approach this challenge and similar efforts by China to undermine Taiwan's diplomatic status in Africa and the Horn specifically?
Thank you very much. The question of Taiwan across Africa is hugely important. Taiwan is an extremely productive, positive, and responsible member of the international community. And so our engagements with them and cooperative engagements with them across the continent matter. And in the countries where they're finding problematic issues, where we believe at the behest of China, they're receiving harassment from those governments. For us, it's critical to make clear to those governments that when they harass Taiwan like that, they're also making it clear their own lack of commitment to a positive kind of engagement with an open society. And for that reason, they would be putting in jeopardy or calling into question their relationship with us. And so those are the kinds of conversations we need to keep having. We need to make sure are understood. It's best to be able to stave these off before they become public, but diplomacy is often operates in an imperfect information environment, but making sure that people understand afterward that this is going to affect the relationship with us. And that's why we were happy that the government of Somalia actually rescinded that order and started respecting the Taiwanese passports again.
Tell us a bit about how the United States should be assisting and strengthening partners like Somaliland to counter China.
We engage with partners like that, the ones who are looking to go in a positive direction, who have that positive trajectory. We'll meet them where they are and find ways to engage. And we do have extensive engagement with Somaliland. We do currently respect the territorial integrity of Somalia, and the decision of its construction is a question for Somalians, including Somalilanders. But for us, it's vastly more important that all of these different groups and these different states recognize the greater threat of ISIS and al-Shabaab, which are causing just traumatic attacks and mayhem in their country, that's the real enemy, and that they need to work together against that rather than spending their efforts with political infighting amongst themselves.
Okay, so one more question. I'm deeply concerned about our posture in Africa regarding space development. This is an area where the United States must lead. We already have a NASA presence in South Africa, Angola, Rwanda, and Nigeria. are all signatories to the Artemis Accords. Several other countries, including Kenya, are also emerging as leaders in developing space capabilities. Africa's space industry is ripe for U.S. commercial diplomacy. The department should be working hand in hand with the private sector to help our partners in Africa develop their own space capabilities. Last month, I met with 11 members of Botswana's National Assembly, and I have since learned in March, Botswana launched its first satellite into space in partnership with SpaceX. This is the type of commercial partnerships we need to see more of. What are your thoughts on commercial space diplomacy, and how can we push back on China through building space partnerships in Africa?
Thank you for that. Space is an exciting new opportunity for the continent, for everyone in the world. The African Union just established its African Space Agency with a founding engagement in Cairo. We were there in force because this is where we can accomplish a lot of interesting things. So we hit on that. When Botswana was launching its satellite with SpaceX, the president was flying to California for that, so we frankly made sure by inviting him to stop into Washington, because we specifically wanted to recognize what it means to have a forward-looking policy. I don't think I'm breaching any confidence when I say that Secretary Rubio described it as the single best meeting he'd ever had. It was all positive. But this is what happens when you work with a government that really wants to do things the right way. And that's why, even though we still have to advocate for American companies in Botswana, we talk to them about ongoing practices and with their neighbors. The simple fact is they're a good partner. We engage with them extensively, and we end up having tremendous success with it. And they're an example for the rest of the region.
Great. You may have to tell the secretary that he hurt our feelings, that the meeting was better than when he meets with us. That really is hurtful. Senator Booker.
I again will defer to the more senior senator from Delaware.
I again will express embarrassment and yet take advantage of the opportunity of your kindness. I'll just ask two more questions, if I might. Botswana is a great example of a country that is relatively stable, peaceful, has developed its vast mineral resources in a positive way for its people and for its independence. President Boko is a great example of someone where over the 25 years of PEPFAR as a program, Botswana, which had one of the very highest HIV/AIDS burdens when we began, transitioned to country ownership and partnership. My most recent visit there with Senator Graham, we were impressed by how much progress they've made. Over 25 years, PEPFAR has saved 25 million lives. I respect and understand why the administration is prioritizing commercial diplomacy, something I also have long championed. It's the way that we will move forward in this century with the vast majority of African countries. But we cannot neglect some of the foundational public health needs that still are central to our relations with dozens of countries. The Secretary recently testified that 85% of PEPFAR funding was still being delivered and only 15% had been canceled due to corruption. One of the things I disagreed with publicly about someone who's no longer with the department was his characterization that the termination of a contract for male circumcision was because it was either DEI or corrupt, when in fact public health documents show it's the most effective way to reduce transmission. Can you give us any sense? What is the actual plan and path forward for PEPFAR? The administration has just submitted a rescission that would claw back significant amounts of funding that was authorized and appropriated by Congress for PEPFAR. What do you view as the path forward, and how can we get a specific update on what's actually the intention of the administration with regards to PEPFAR?
Thank you for raising an incredibly important issue. As I had mentioned before, the reason why I'd spent so much time talking about commercial diplomacy is because that was the fundamental change, the difference in what we were doing. But that doesn't mean the critical things we were doing in other spheres don't also matter. As somebody who spent most of his time in Africa, and almost every one of the countries in which I've served are PEPFAR countries, I have a deep and abiding love and respect for the program. As Secretary Rubio had said, 85% of that is continuing. The shifting with the change in how our government is structured, has been something we're focused on right now. And so the Global Health Security Bureau is absorbing the tasks that USAID used to do in regard to PEPFAR, and working out our staffing and especially our overseas posture is all predicated on making sure this continues to happen. I am afraid that I don't have any information on a response to the rescission, because that would be our F Bureau and the Global Health Security Bureau, but I will absolutely find out about that and get back to you, sir.
If you could convey an intense interest and enthusiasm for clarity on that, I think governing by rescission, by full year CR, reconciliation, and rescission renders the appropriations role of Congress irrelevant and is a very dangerous precedent to be setting. My hope is that instead, the administration will accept the repeated offers of members of both parties to work together to reform, sustain, and improve foreign assistance, because whether it's the Millennium Challenge Corporation or it's PEPFAR previously delivered exclusively through USAID and CDC, there are long-standing bilateral relationships with dozens of countries on the continent where I'm getting the calls I'm sure you're getting: confusion, alarm, and question about what is our future together. Senator Graham and I have worked hard to introduce and pass legislation that creates public-private foundations to advance food security and to advance conservation. Examples from Africa were the principal reason, but it's not exclusive to Africa. The Conservation Foundation is law and is funded. The Food Security Foundation, Senator Graham's continuing to work to advance, and it'll soon be on a market for this committee. Are you familiar with these at all? Do you see the idea of doubling public money with private partnership money, whether foundation or corporate, as being a positive model for moving forward together?
Thank you. While I know of these programs, I do know the idea of public-private partnerships has proven effective throughout. Wherever it's possible to involve the private sector, it generally improves the opportunities. It's one of the reasons why I'm such a supporter of the blended finance with DFC. It's bringing that in, which allows that dynamism, that vibrancy that the private sector can bring to that. So I think that's an appropriate way to address both of those concerns. And I would also say that when it comes to feeding programs, anything that engages the American farmer is probably going to be a good investment.
Thank you, Mr. Fitrell, and thank you again, Senator Booker, for your decency, your compassion, and your forbearance, and to the chairman for tolerating my many questions.
Thank you. Senator Booker.
Thank you very much. A vote's been called, so I'm going to try to do speed round. If you can get me I'll try to get my questions shorter if you get your responses shorter. So South Africa produces 75% of the world's platinum. So many critical minerals flow through it. I'm worried about our policy towards South Africa limiting our critical mineral acquisition. They've been left out of some now key consortium. Could you just comment on that really quickly and cogently?
Actually, the South Africans' main points when they came to visit just a few weeks ago were that this is the area in which we can find great opportunities for cooperation. Again, we have something like 600 American companies active in South Africa. That kind of engagement is possible, so I would be hugely supportive of that.
I'm concerned about the president's executive order undermining that effort, but I do know, having spent a lot of time on these issues, the complications of the South Africans' governmental posture, but also the opportunities. It's important diplomacy, but I'm going to continue really quickly. I agree that we need to do a better job on commercial diplomacy. You're such the right champion for that. But to say that that has not been previously a focus is concerning me, because one of the things, the legacy things out there is Prosperity Africa, which since 2019, as you know, has facilitated over 1,000 deals across 49 African countries with an estimated value of $65 billion. What's the status of one of those legacy good works, Prosper Africa?
My understanding is the real future for that is coming through in legislation from the Hill, and I would be excited to welcome Prosper Africa into the Africa Bureau, which is something I've been trying to. I will be mimicking if I cannot absorb, because I believe in the task. And I should say that when I was saying that it wasn't the focus before, we had specific people that were focused on it before. We had foreign commercial service officers where they are present doing amazing work. But we also need to be active where they're not present. And so the idea that ambassadors need to lead this and that entire country teams need to work on the commercial diplomacy, that's where this approach is going. But I'm a big fan of what Prosper Africa did. And one way or another, that task is coming to the African.
Next issue. So when I was mayor of the city of Newark, it was a city that was known for legendary corruption. This is not a brag, but I'm the first mayor since the early 60s that wasn't indicted of something. And when we got there, I wanted to bring in new ethics laws, new transparency, really clean it up to let people know that we were doing things differently, and benefited from a lot of ethics groups helping me come in to pass legislation, executive orders on myself, really making it, and that worked. We had companies come to us. The city said, I swore I would never come back, but seeing what you're doing on the governance reforms makes me know that I can do business here. And after 60 years, almost the same period of which we saw monumental corruption, suddenly our economy was booming, the biggest it had in decades, and the population started growing again. And so that's why I want to make sure that we at least can share some agreement here that it's not just our business relationships. The resources we were investing in the support of governance, civil society, helping with democratization is so vital. And so I'm wondering what you're thinking about those investments, many of which we're turning our back on. They're helping to create an environment that's critical for our businesses to be able to operate.
Yeah, thank you. The overall business environment is exactly what we're trying to do, what we're trying to work with, especially using the local business communities, the American Chambers of Commerce in particular, about making sure.
I agree with all those things, but you see what the PRC is doing. You know this with the Confucius, the 61 Confucius. They're investing in ways that we're not. In other words, isn't this an area that, yes, businesses, chambers of commerce can do a lot of good, but the extraordinary investments we were making on governance, on civil society sectors that were helping the reforms happen, aren't those critical investments as well, beyond what the business community is doing?
I would argue that the business community is very good at making those kinds of investments, and getting their collective behavior instead of their individual behaviors is how we can address that. Because every government asks me to help encourage greater investment in their country. And I always say the way to get greater investment is to take care of the ones you have now. And that means addressing that business climate. And you see that success works. You see the more successful.
So you're telling me businesses, because I was in numerous African countries where we were investing in how to clean up corruption from your elections, investing in creating more transparency. Let me give you another great example. It's just the media landscape, encountering propaganda, the Voice of America. There's so many of these things that are going to create an environment where democracy is more secure, where there's anti-corruption efforts, because I can go through Nigeria, Ghana, that they're battling sort of corruption within their government. Just the businesses advising them, as opposed to putting people there that could help to create more transparency and more accountability. Are you saying those investments are not needed?
I'm saying that what the embassies and what the private sector do, including with the training of journalism through the embassies, we do a lot of that. I'm not saying that we're not going to do those other types of programs. That's just what the overall Foreign Assistance Review is looking at.
Well, I would say, mindful of time, and the conclusion is that you and I have so much agreement, and I'm actually grateful not only that you're here, but that you're doing so much of the work. But we are competing with a country, and this is the core of the hearing, that is not just investing in their business relationships, where they have literally say up front, we don't care how you run your government, we don't care about the corruption, we don't care about any of that stuff, which often blocks. When I was in West Africa, I was hearing from major American corporations that were not investing because of the corruption that they were encountering in some West African countries. It just seems to me that we need to be doing, as you use your words, an all-in strategy, not just from the extraordinary power of American business, American investments, but doing some of these resources that we've been doing that pay double and triple bottom line returns by creating, as I saw it here in America, an environment that's more trusted, more secure. And by not doing these things, from humanitarian aid all the way to dealing with countering China's propaganda, which I had government leaders in numerous countries saying, please tell your story, talk about democracy, that failures to invest in those areas actually undermines our ability to have the kind of economic ties that I know you so well champion.
Thank you, Senator Booker, and thank you, Ambassador, for your testimony. We appreciate the time you have spent with us. For the information of members, the record will remain open until the close of business tomorrow, June 5th. We ask the witness to respond as promptly as possible to any questions that come, and your responses will also be made part of the record. And with the thanks of the committee, this hearing is adjourned.